Hi, I'm Bruce, and this is part 3 in our series on the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st Edition Dungeon Master's Guide. If you hadn't seen the earlier videos, here's the quick recap. In part 1, we explored Gary Gygax's DMing philosophy, his belief in the DM as the final arbiter, the value of challenge and scarcity, the role of time in a living campaign, and why respecting the rules before you change them is essential. Part 2 looked at the enduring rules, from treasure tables and procedural dungeon generation to saving throws, morale, and the literary roots found in Appendix N, and the fascinating reasons those rules were written the way that they were. Now for this final part, we're stepping into the wonderfully strange territory, the oddities, contradictions, and downright baffling features that make the 1st edition DMG so legendary. These quirks didn't just cause confusion, they inspired decades of creative homebrewing design experimentation. The 1st edition DMG is famous, maybe infamous, for its random tables. And not just for monsters or treasure. You get the random Harlot encounter table, complete with categories like brazen, strumpet, slide, pimp, and richly dressed courtesan. You get the potion miscibility chart, where mixing 2 magic brews might heal you, explode in your face, or permanently change your character. There's even guidance for random dinosaur encounters, broken down by climate. On one hand, these tables seem over the top, too specific, too quirky, but they added flavor and unpredictability. They gave the world texture. In a city game, you could roll in that Harlot table and suddenly the night takes an unexpected turn. The player might get creative after a bad potion mix and turn it into a character-defining moment. Even the dinosaurs have their charm. Imagine trekking through a jungle only to bump into a triceratops, because these tables weren't just filler, they were springboards for encounters you'd never have thought of on your own. And they're still inspiring today's DMs, from OSR adventure generators to indie RPGs that lean heavily on the procedural content. But for all its detail, the DMG is far from flawless. There are contradictions and omissions that have puzzled players for decades. One of the most famous. In 1st edition, a natural 20 isn't necessarily an automatic hit. That assumption, so common in modern D&D, just isn't part of the rules. Likewise, a natural 1 doesn't automatically mean a miss. Many groups played it that way anyway, but strictly by the book, the math still mattered. Then there are the missing pieces, like base movement rates for some races when unarmored, information you'd think would be easy to find, but isn't clearly stated in any core book. And rules sometimes shift between sources. These gaps forced dungeon masters to make their own calls. You couldn't just look up the answer in a rules compendium, or Google it or ChatGPT it. You had to decide what made sense for your table. And in doing so, you were already following Gygax's rulings over rules philosophy, whether you realized it or not. The 1st edition DMG has rules so ambitious they could have only come from someone who wanted to simulate everything. And sometimes that ambition got in the way of actually playing. Take grappling, pummeling, and overbearing. They covered every possible unarmed combat scenario. In practice, they're a tangle of modifiers, size comparisons, and percentile rolls that can turn a tavern brawl into a bookkeeping session. Now when we played, I must have spent about 5 minutes going through the tables, finally rolling once, and realized that the player headbutted the one guy. That was it. Most groups either simplified them or avoided them entirely, but you can see the intent. Gygax wanted the rules to handle any fight the players could imagine. Then there's the weapon versus armor type table. It gives bonuses or penalties to hit based on exactly what armor your opponent is wearing. A longsword might be great against chainmail, but not so hot against plate. Historically accurate? Sure. Practical in the middle of a session? Not so much. Many DMs quietly ignored it, but it shows how far 1st E leaned in towards simulation. And then we have initiative segments, weapon speed factors, the crown jewel of tournament level precision. This system could determine whether a spell was interrupted mid-cast or whether a longer weapon struck first in a charge. In the right hands, it created cinematic detail. In the wrong hands, it slowed the game to a crawl. One thing you can't ignore in the DMG is the voice. This isn't a bland corporate manual, it's Gary Gygax talking to you directly. Sometimes like a stern teacher, sometimes like a dry-humored uncle. You get all caps proclamations. You cannot have a meaningful campaign if strict time records are not kept. You get sarcastic asides about barracks room lawyers who argue rules mid-game. And you get the occasional wink, like the playful absurdity of the Harlock counter table, or the sly jokes buried in examples. It feels personal. You can almost hear him across the table telling you exactly how to run your game, and daring you to prove him wrong. That strong, unapologetic tone is part of what gives the first edition DMG its lasting personality. Some of the most frustrating roles in the DMG are also the most inspiring. Illusion Magic is a perfect example. The rules are vague, open-ended, and sometimes contradictory. Can an illusion kill someone, or do they get a save? It's a little lot. Gygax left a lot of that up to the DM, which meant every group handled illusions differently. The same goes for blank spaces in the rules. Missing stats, undefined edge cases, or incomplete explanations weren't always mistakes. Sometimes they were opportunities. This is the heart of the rulings over rules legacy that lives on the OSR movement and many indie RPGs today. The DMG wasn't just a rulebook, it was a toolbox, and sometimes the most useful tools were the ones that you had to build yourself. For all its contradictions, gaps, and strange design choices, the quirks make it personal. You're not just reading a sterile set of procedures, you're having a conversation, sometimes an argument with Gary Gygax himself. The lack of perfect clarity wasn't a flaw so much as an invitation. Every undefined rule, every table that raised some questions that it answered was a chance for you and your group to decide how your version of AD&D would run. And once you made that call, it became your game. That sense of ownership is part of the why the DMG built such a loyal following. No two tables played exactly the same, but they all felt connected to the shared DNA of Gygax's works. The mess wasn't something you cleaned up, it was the raw material you shaped in your own campaign world. So as we wrap up this 3-part series, here's the truth. The first edition Dungeon Master Guide's imperfections are as important as its genius. The bizarre random tables, the contradictory rulings, the half-finished subsystems, they're part of what made it a living, breathing artifact of the hobby's early days. And they're still inspiring new generations of Dungeon Masters to tinker, invent, and make the game their own. I want to hear from you. What's your favorite oddball table, contradictory rule, or homebrew that was born out of something you found in the first edition Dungeon Master Guide? Drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching all 3 parts of this series. If you've enjoyed exploring the philosophy, the rules, and the beautiful mess of the first Dungeon Master's Guide, let me know if you'd like me to dig deeper into specific sections in future videos, maybe even recreating some of those classic tables for modern play. Would you want to see something like that? And remember, whether you're running AD&D, 5e, or your own homebrew, the real magic isn't in following the rules perfectly, it's in making the game unforgettable to your players.